Deep in the rugged mountain ranges of southern Afghanistan, where the earth folds into ancient ridges and valleys that have swallowed armies for centuries, a story has persisted for over 2 decades that refuses to be buried. It is a story that sits at the crossroads of military history, folklore, psychology, and the very human desire to explain the unexplainable. The so-called Kandahar Giant mystery has circulated through veteran communities, independent research circles, and online forums since the early 2000s, drawing equal parts fascination and skepticism. But what actually happened? What do we genuinely know? What remains unverified? And why does this story continue to echo so loudly in the spaces where official records go silent? The story as it circulates in its most common form describes a U.S. military patrol that went missing in the mountains outside Kandahar sometime in 2002 during the early phase of Operation Enduring Freedom. According to the accounts, a special operations recovery team was dispatched to the last known coordinates after radio contact was lost. What they allegedly found was not a battlefield aftermath in any conventional sense. Equipment was destroyed, drag marks were visible on the ground, and a cave entrance led them deeper into the situation. Inside, they reportedly encountered a massive humanoid creature standing somewhere between 12 and 15 feet tall, with red hair, elongated limbs, and physical characteristics that matched no known species. A firefight followed, the creature was killed, and the body was extracted under highly unusual circumstances by personnel who wore no identifying insignias. Soldiers were then reportedly pressured into signing non-disclosure agreements, and official records of the entire event simply do not exist in any public database. That is the story. Now here is the critical question every honest investigator must ask first. What is the verified foundation beneath it? The honest answer is that the core incident, as described, has never been confirmed by any official military, government, or independent forensic source. There are no declassified documents, no confirmed casualty records matching the described soldier, known only as Dan, and no after-action reports that have ever been publicly authenticated. The Department of Defense has not acknowledged the event. This does not automatically mean nothing happened in those mountains, but it does mean that anyone presenting this story as established fact is working beyond what the evidence actually supports. Intellectual honesty requires stating that plainly before going any further. And yet, dismissing the story entirely is also intellectually unsatisfying, because the environment in which it emerged, both geographically and historically, is deeply real and genuinely complex. Afghanistan in 2002 was one of the most operationally chaotic environments American forces had ever entered. The initial invasion following the September 11th attacks had dismantled the Taliban government rapidly, but the country's terrain made full control an illusion. The mountains surrounding Kandahar, part of the broader Hindu Kush and Spingar ranges, are among the most forbidding landscapes on Earth. Some of what happened in those mountains during the early years of the war remains sealed to this day, not because of creatures or conspiracies, but because that is the ordinary nature of classified military operations. The Afghan landscape itself carries a rich tradition of stories about giants and supernatural beings that predates Islam, let alone American military operations. The Deo, a term used across Persian and Pashto-speaking cultures, refers to a class of giant or demonic entity that inhabits remote wilderness areas. These figures appear in poetry, in oral tradition, in cautionary tales told to children about wandering too far from settlements. The Nephilim, referenced in Abrahamic religious texts including the Book of Genesis and the apocryphal Book of Enoch, are described as enormous hybrid beings born of supernatural and human unions, known for violence and physical domination. These are ancient narratives, not invented for the modern internet, and they form a genuine cultural backdrop against which unusual experiences in remote Afghan terrain would inevitably be interpreted by locals and, potentially, by soldiers who had absorbed some of that regional context. Archaeologically, the broader region of the ancient Near East and Central Asia does contain a documented history of unusually large skeletal remains, though the scientific community is careful about how such findings are classified and reported. Gigantism as a medical condition is real and documented throughout human history, caused by excess growth hormone production, typically through pituitary gland tumors. Individuals with severe gigantism have reached heights approaching 9 feet in recorded medical history. The condition also causes a range of skeletal abnormalities, including unusually long limbs, altered facial structure, and sometimes polydactyly, which is the condition of having extra fingers or toes. Polydactyly itself appears in ancient texts with notable frequency, and those arguments deserve serious engagement. Combat stress has measurable, documented effects on human perception and memory. Studies of soldiers in high-intensity conflict zones have shown that threat detection becomes hypersensitive, pattern recognition becomes distorted, and memory encoding under extreme fear is often unreliable. What soldiers experience and what they later report can differ substantially, not because they are lying, but because the human brain under combat conditions is not functioning as a neutral recording device. Group dynamics also play a significant role. When multiple people share an intense and confusing experience simultaneously, their accounts tend to converge over time through a process researchers call memory conformity, where individual recollections are unconsciously shaped by the accounts of others. This means that consistency across multiple accounts of the same event does not necessarily prove the event happened as described. It may simply reflect shared storytelling and mutual reinforcement over years of informal communication. That said, the psychological explanation has its own limits. It works best when explaining perceptual distortions of real events, but it struggles to account for the physical evidence that some accounts reference, including destroyed equipment and unusual remains. If the entire encounter was a hallucination or misidentification, what explains the physical state of the recovery site as allegedly described by the team? Skeptics typically respond that the physical evidence claims are themselves unverified, and they are right. We are dealing with layers of unverified accounts building on other unverified accounts, which makes clean conclusions impossible in either direction. The question of missing records and information suppression is where the story becomes genuinely interesting to anyone familiar with how classification and military bureaucracy actually work. Freedom of Information Act requests related to personnel recovery operations near Kandahar in the 2002 period have reportedly returned incomplete results, vague responses, and in some cases, documents that appeared briefly and then were reclassified. Researchers have noted what they describe as a gap in flight logs from Bagram Air Base during the alleged extraction window. These anomalies are cited by proponents as evidence of deliberate suppression. Skeptics counter that FOIA requests related to special operations in active conflict zones routinely return incomplete results because classification protections are broad, legitimate, and frequently applied. The absence of records in this framework proves nothing more than the ordinary opacity of classified military operations. You have the genuine psychological vulnerability of combatants operating under extreme stress. You have classified military operations that by their nature resist public scrutiny. And you have a decentralized information environment where anonymous testimony spreads and survives deletion cycles across forums, podcasts, and alternative media platforms. None of these elements individually prove the story, but together they create conditions where the story can breathe and grow. Researchers like L.A. Marzulli have conducted interviews with anonymous individuals claiming involvement in the incident, and while these accounts cannot be independently verified, they have been influential in keeping the story in public circulation. The consistency of certain specific details across independent accounts, including the red hair, the height estimate, the six-fingered hands, and the heavy-lift helicopter extraction, is noted by proponents as unlikely to emerge coincidentally across separate fabrications. Critics point out that once a story circulates widely online, its specific details become available to anyone wishing to construct a credible-sounding testimony, making consistency across later accounts less meaningful as evidence. What the Kandahar Giant mystery ultimately reflects, more than anything else, is a profound and deeply human discomfort with the boundaries of the known world. We live in an era when satellite imagery covers nearly every square meter of the planet's surface, when genetic sequencing can identify species from environmental samples, and when global communication connects remote regions to international information networks within seconds. The idea that something genuinely unknown, something biologically categorized as impossible, could exist in a mountain cave in southern Afghanistan and be encountered by trained military personnel in the early 21st century challenges a foundational assumption of modern civilization, that the map is complete, that there are no more monsters waiting in unmapped territory, that we have, in some fundamental sense, finished the inventory of what the world contains. History suggests that assumption has been wrong before. New species continue to be discovered regularly, some of them surprisingly large. The giant squid was considered legend for centuries before the first physical specimen was examined scientifically. The okapi, a large mammal native to Central Africa, was dismissed as African folklore by Western scientists until a physical specimen was produced in 1901. These examples do not prove that a 15-foot humanoid lives in Afghan caves, but they are honest reminders that certainty about what does not exist is often premature. The most intellectually honest position on the Kandahar Giant mystery is this: the event as popularly described has not been verified by any credible, independent, or official source. The creature as described does not correspond to any known species. The accounts that form the foundation of the story are anonymous, unverifiable, and in that gap between silence and certainty, the story lives, as stories about giants and hidden worlds always have, at the edge of the map, in the place where documented history ends and human imagination, memory, and fear begin to fill the void. What this story asks of us, in the end, is not belief or disbelief but honest inquiry. The willingness to ask hard questions about what we know, what we do not know, and why certain doors remain locked. In a region as ancient, complex, and battle-scarred as the mountains of southern Afghanistan, the honest answer may simply be that we have not yet asked all the right questions. And until we do, the giant will remain exactly where it has always been, just beyond the edge of certainty waiting.